Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays, hosted by someone's favorite film buff, Nathan. I love movies and I want to share that with you. From old originals to cult classics and foreign favorites, along with straight up drivel, WWW is your place for all things movies. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays. My name is Nathan, the host of What to Watch Wednesdays, the show where we talk about 3 movies all in the same night. And for tonight's episode, I'm going to level the playing field a little bit. I'm going to be fully honest. I'm burnt out. It's been a long quarter, and I'm pretty sure most of my fellow students are also very burnt out because it's been a long quarter. So I figured, why not take it very seriously with tonight's episode and talk about comedy movies to relieve the tension. And when you ask me if I'm going to be serious about doing comedy movies, my response to that question, or more specifically, if you ask me, surely, Nathan, you're not going to be talking about comedy movies in a serious manner. My response is, of course I'm serious about talking about comedy movies. And don't call me Shirley. That's my great-aunt's name. And more specifically, that joke is tied in directly to the comedy movies we're going to be talking about tonight, because we are talking about the Naked Gun trilogy starring Leslie Nielsen. For our first movie on the watch list, we're going to be taking a look at The Naked Gun from 1988, followed up by The Naked Gun 2.5 from 1991, and closing out with Naked Gun 33 1/3 from 1994. I honestly want to have some fun, so we're going to go straight to the music break, and when we come back, we'll jump into the first Naked Gun. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our first movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at The Naked Gun from the Files of Police Squad from 1988, available to watch now on Paramount+. For the basic plot summary of The Naked Gun, we follow Detective Lieutenant Frank Drebin as he must begin investigating the wealthy businessman known as Vincent Ludwig after Frank's partner is shot. Now, at the base level, that sounds like kind of a dark premise. And during the intro I mentioned we're talking about comedy movies. So let me assure you all right now, Frank Drebin's partner is killed in an extremely slapstick way. He falls off a boat backwards after walking into a bear trap and getting stuck on wet paint and, just overall doing a bunch of nonsensical things before falling into the ocean. And then even then, he's not dead, actually. I should have corrected myself when I said that. He doesn't even die. He's just shot. And he somehow survives. Somehow, Frank's partner survives. And let me tell you, during that first scene, that really establishes the tone of Naked Gun right then and there. But, that's just the first scene. We've got an entire rest of movie to talk about, and we've got a little bit more time to talk about it. So let's use that time very efficiently. Let's start off with the simple things. Most people have heard of Naked Gun at this point in current pop culture. People know it as this goofy, kind of deadpan, very slapstick comedy series about a police officer. And while all of that is completely true, I want to mention this much about the original Naked Gun. Rewatching it after having seen it for the first time a couple years back, I was really surprised to see the fact that this movie is actually really intelligently written. And I know that sounds kind of diminishing. I know that sounds a little bit like I had my expectations set too low. But can you blame me with sometimes modern 2000s comedy movies not being all that great? I wasn't expecting it to be this high quality upon a rewatch is the main thing. I was expecting it to be funny. I was expecting it to be well orchestrated from a physical production side of things because it's well known for having a lot of visual gags. But when it comes to the dialogue gags and when it comes to plot development, I was actually incredibly surprised to see a very deep connection and a deep intertwining of the two elements. It's hard to kind of mention these things without providing specific examples, so I'll give you at least one. So I'm not explaining every single joke in the movie, but still giving you a really good example. During that beginning scene where Frank's partner is shot a bunch of times, it shows that he is sneaking onto a boat called I Love You. quite literally, the letters on the boat say I love you. Now, when Frank's partner is in the hospital, still somehow surviving being shot multiple times and falling into a bear trap and all that fun slapstick stuff, he says to Frank the following: I love you. This Pier 43 or whatever it was, and says some name. Now, I saw the words I love you on the boat earlier in the movie, and I thought to myself, hey, that's a funny little visual gag. And then during that scene in the hospital, Frank's boss pulls out a photo and goes, Frank, look, the boat is named I Love You. That's why he said he loved you. And my response was, what? They actually thought about that? Again, I know it sounds so diminishing to not have that level of expectation going into these movies when they have the reputation that they do for doing exactly that kind of thing. But what I was actually surprised by was how quick that payoff was, because that hospital scene happens not even 10 minutes after that opening where Frank's partner is shot. So the setup and payoff is really lightning quick. And it was that moment in particular that made me realize that I was in for a very fun ride. I will say this much right now. Naked Gun is a classic for a reason. And any thoughts that I had that it was somewhat overrated or didn't earn its place are completely dispelled in the first 10 minutes. Thank you, congratulations, clap, 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 you did well. Let's get to some other things about Naked Gun before we move on to the sequel. Here's some things I really need to mention. From a writing perspective, I really like the main character's attitude. Frank Drebin is so cocky all the time. His attitude towards his love interest, that being Jane, he's still very cocky and still very much a stoic, straight-faced man. And that's where it gets the reputation for being deadpan. And most of that comes down to the performance of Frank by the lead actor, that being Leslie Nielsen, who is such a genius. He is such a genius. I adore everything about Leslie Nielsen, from his looks to the way he delivers lines to his overall intonation. He'd be a great radio narrator, but he's also great as a comedy presenter. It's a perfect mix of multiple things. And speaking of a perfect mix of multiple things, the cast overall for Naked Gun is also really good. We have Leslie Nielsen, we have Priscilla Presley as the love interest, we have George Kennedy as Frank Drebin's a superior officer, and for Frank Drebin's partner, we have the... Frank Drebin's partner is played by O.J. Simpson. I'm sorry, I had something in my throat there. My comment on Frank Drebin's partner is that he is played by O.J. Simpson. That is all I have to say regarding Frank Drebin's partner. Moving on. So, with all that being said, we have now covered the cast, we've covered the writing, we've covered my surprise at it. Is there anything else I have to say about Naked Gun? Well, I'll say this much. I liked it, but I didn't love it as much as the second movie. We're going to go to music break, and when we come back, we'll jump into Naked Gun 2, so stick around for that. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our second movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at The Naked Gun 2.5, The Smell of Fear, from 1991, available to watch now on Paramount+. For the basic plot summary of Naked Gun 2.5, we follow Frank Drebin. Yes, he's back. This time, he's trying to get his ex-wife or ex-girlfriend back, who just so happens to be working for a Dr. Meinheimer. Dr. Meinheimer turns out to be an environmentalist, an advisor to the president. So naturally, he is a target for members of Big Oil, Big Coal, and Big Nuke, wanting to kill him off so that he can't promote environmental messaging to the president. Would you look at that? What an interesting idea for a plot. For a comedy movie. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a brilliant work of satire. That's probably because they're being satirical, and it's certainly saying something, that's for sure. But we need to acknowledge something very interesting before we get to any of the effectiveness of the plot or the satire. Naked Gun 2 is actually called Naked Gun 2.5, and then it's also given the subtitle of The Smell of Fear. You may ask, why is it called 2.5? And I honestly don't have an answer for you. I could give you a joke answer, but the real reason, I don't know. The joke answer is they always have, okay, so I came up with this while watching the movie. My reasoning for them calling it Naked Gun 2.5 is because it's like the first Naked Gun, but in every single scene of the movie, they're always having two chaotic, random, running jokes going on in one scene with half the level of plot development. That's the reason I call it 2.5. That's the reason why I think they called it 2.5. They were just like, we're going to do half the plot development and have two jokes per scene that keep interacting with each other or overlapping with each other and are so chaotic that people can barely follow along with either of them. Let me say right now that I love Naked Gun 2 so much more than the first movie, and because of that descriptor, you can probably see why. So let's get into some other things here. The effectiveness of the plot. When you have two crazy jokes happening at the same time in every single scene, the important question comes up of how can you possibly pay attention to the plot? And that's a trick question, because you really can't most of the time. You're just kind of sitting back and enjoying the fireworks and the nonsense unfolding in front of you. So it's got that going for it, or going against it, depending on how your outlook is, or what your outlook is, more specifically. For me, when I'm wanting to watch a silly comedy movie to wind down my night after dealing with a bunch of big projects and dealing with school, just being school, it's great. For a deep and highly rooted political commentary about environmentalism and how it's silenced by big corporations, you're not going to get a lot of that because there's a lot of Leslie Nielsen just messing around for the sake of it, and it being really, really funny, that it's almost distracting to the point they're trying to go for. Almost. Most of the time. Actually, yes, most of the time, if not all the time. But I'm not complaining here. I, again, like Naked Gun 2 so much more than the first movie. Part of the reason that I like this movie more than the first one is because of how chaotic it is. It gets so much chaotic, so much quicker. Part of the reason I also like it is that I appreciate the style of comedy that the first movie had going for it more in the second movie, and I'll break down what that means. I should have mentioned it with the first movie, but like every single time I do a What to Watch Wednesdays episode, I end up bringing up things that I missed with the first movie while talking about the second movie, so we're just going to cover it here. The first Naked Gun, for being called Naked Gun, is incredibly raunchy, and I mean that in a way possible. I don't mean it in the best or the worst way. I mean it in a state of fact way. It is raunchy. The second Naked Gun is also pretty raunchy, but in a oddly, partially tasteful way, or if not tasteful because it's still raunchy, in a way that I personally found a lot funnier. I think it was executed better in the second movie than in the first movie. The first movie felt like it was being raunchy almost for the sake of it at points. Not all the time, but at points. The second movie feels like it can get away with it a bit better because it's being a bit more tasteful with it and it's being actually funny with it. Now again, this is my opinion, and I can't break down that opinion too much because, again, it is raunchy humor. This is the radio. I can only acknowledge that it has raunchy humor. I can't go into any details whatsoever. So we're going to move on from that point and talk about some other things that it did better than the first movie. Weirdly enough, I feel like Naked Gun is better made as a movie. The first Naked Gun is great as a comedy. As a movie in and of itself, it's not exactly the best. It's still a well-produced, well-scripted, well-shot movie. But from a visual standpoint, in terms of basic filmmaking craft, like, you know, focusing your shot on your lead actor, the first movie struggles here and there. The second movie, I feel like they nailed that a bit better, while also ramping up the jokes. And because of that, you start to notice the production elements a lot more. As a good example, let's say you have to pan the camera to show certain visual jokes. You notice that a lot more in the second movie than in the first one. You start to notice, hey, hang on a second, you need a decent cinematographer to do good visual comedy in a movie like this. You need to be able to hide details and reveal them at the right pace, so you're not just overwhelming your audience with a bunch of jokes all at once. And again, you notice that more in the second movie because it is better made. That's my point with that whole exploration. I honestly can say that because of that, I would say that Naked Gun 2 is just as good as the first movie in different ways. It is better in different ways, maybe not as iconic in other ways, but overall, they are about at exactly the same quality level. A part of me even wants to put the second movie above the first movie. That's just because I laughed at it more and I liked it more. So now that I say that out loud, I actually am going to put Naked Gun 2 above Naked Gun 1. I'm not sorry. I apologize for nothing. Naked Gun 2 is better than Naked Gun 1 in my opinion. That is my opinion. I'm sticking to it. I've decided it now, live on air, and you got to hear it. So, with all that being said, we're going to go to our next music break, and we're going to jump into Naked Gun 3 after that break. Stick around. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our third and final movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at The Naked Gun 33 and a Third, The Final Insult, from 1994, available to watch now on Paramount+. For the basic plot summary of Naked Gun 33, a retired Frank Drebin must come out of retirement to stop a bomber named Rocco. I almost read that as Morocco for some reason, because apparently I can't write the letter R. Okay, good to know. Thanks, handwriting. Anyways, the bomber's name is Rocco, by the way, in case that wasn't clear from my weird diatribe there. Anyways, point is, so like the last movie, before we get into anything regarding Naked Gun 33 and a Third, The Final Insult, I have to acknowledge something. Who on earth named these movies? Why would you call it 33 and a Third? I can't make a joke about you guys doing 33 jokes in one scene and then doing 1/3 of the plot development like I did with the second movie. That's not how this works. Nobody could do 33 jokes within a scene. That's too difficult. And I've been counting the jokes you guys are doing. If you're doing 33 within the scenes of Naked Gun 33 and a Third, then they're not all good ones, okay? Even if they are 33, they're not all good ones, at least in my opinion, but I feel pretty strongly in that opinion. Let's get to some basics here. Here's the thing. Naked Gun 33 and a Third. It's funny, yes. In comparison to the other two movies, however, I would say that it's not as funny. I was not laughing as hard as I was at Naked Gun 2.5 with Naked Gun 33 and a Third. I'm just going to say Naked Gun 2 and 3 now, because I'm getting really ticked off having to say 33 and a Third every single time. So Naked Gun 2 made me laugh more than Naked Gun 3. Okay? Okay, cool. So I will admit that it's funny, but I wasn't laughing as much. I was at most laughing every scene, but even then, it's more like I was snorting or just going, that's funny. Yeah, that's funny. Kinda. That was my internal thoughts. The was my actual reaction. Not really a laugh out loud kind of a movie, which is unfortunate when it's a comedy. You know, it's really unfortunate when that's the case when you're talking about a comedy movie. So there's that. Let's get into why that was happening. First of all, I think the biggest issue with Naked Gun 3, is that the separation between the dialogue and the jokes is too great. What do I mean by that? Well, in the other two movies, especially the first one and specifically the second one as well, they ride this really good line with their dialogue where it's able to communicate the story or have some development to it while also being jokes. That was something I was talking about with the first movie specifically, how in terms of the overall sets and the jokes, they were still able to intertwine with the plot. The dialogue was very much like that and has very much been like that for these movies. Third, Naked Gun 3, I almost said 33 and a Third. I'm going to try and stop myself from doing that. Naked Gun 3 has jokes that tie into the dialogue, but not as much, and it's not as seamless as the other two. You start to notice the dialogue that's just there to advance the plot and not be a joke. And in comparison to the other two movies, where the two of those two things are so well ingrained and so deeply connected with each other to the point where every single joke feels like it's progressing the plot or it's funny, it's really noticeable when they aren't as tied together and aren't as funny. That's the big point. I think the biggest issue, well, another huge issue with Naked Gun 3 is that it's just really not as funny as the other two. Actually, I'll save that point for later. I'll talk about some other things to go along with the dialogue, because I've just kind of been like going all over the place. I'll get this off my chest because I'm starting to drift into that state that a lot of movies put me in, especially a lot of third movies put me in, where they're kind of confused about what they want to be, and there feels like something is off with the movie itself in the way it's presented and the way it's sequenced, and there's just something missing from it that the other two movies in its series had. And so when I get down to reviewing it, I get a bit confused when I'm talking about it, and I just kind of get all over the place with it. That's what Naked Gun 3 is doing to me right now, and I'm trying to really rein myself in, because I have two really good points at the end of this that I gotta make, but it's hard not to get that way when the movie itself seems a bit lost as to what made it successful in the first place. So I'm going to do my best here, but understand that's what's happening to my brain. I think part of the reason that this movie boggles me a little bit and why it feels so off is it's gone a step further in the technical quality that Naked Gun 2 had. I mean, sure, there's good cinematography in the first Naked Gun, but there's parts that are a bit rough around the edges. The next movie, Naked Gun 2, managed to bump it up enough to where you're noticing it and it's enhancing the humor. Naked Gun 3 takes its technical quality and goes too far with it to the point where you're noticing it more than the humor. And that's a really bad imbalance to have. The second movie hit that balance pretty good. Third movie kind of drops the ball a little bit. They also dropped the ball with the music. My goodness, I love the main Naked Gun theme song. I could sing it right now, and I'm not going to, because that would be embarrassing and I'd rather not. But it's an iconic theme song for an iconic comedy series, and they kind of botched it in the third movie. That ticked me off a little bit. I also think they botched the music overall. There's very awkward transitions between certain musical pieces, and I don't think a lot of the music that they used really fit the scene all that well. I'll say this much to kind of really wrap this up, because the less I have to talk about Naked Gun 3, the better. So let's get to my final 2 points. There are two major crop up issues with Naked Gun 3. These are things that keep coming up over and over again while you're watching the movie. The first one is that every single time they make a joke, they feel the need to point it out. Now, for a comedy movie, you need to understand that pointing out your joke and or explaining it and or acknowledging it, especially in a series where your main character is known for being deadpan and saying absurd things with a completely straight face, acknowledging it as a film is a problem. Characters acknowledging it, fine. Especially the villain. Have the villain be confused. Have the villain think that Frank is an idiot, because Frank is an idiot, and that's what's funny. His reaction is supposed to be funny. He's supposed to seem rational when he's the villain, and Frank is supposed to seem like the idiot when he's the good guy. But the movie should not be doing that. The movie should be presenting it all as it is while the actors do that. And the lines should not be doing that. It should be subtle, not them pointing out that they just made a joke. Okay, that's number one. Now I'm getting real ticked off. So I'm going to move on to number 2 before I start yelling even more. Number 2 is the fact that Rocco, the bomber, does not do anything for the first 40 minutes of the movie. Rocco, this bomb threat, barely does anything for the first 40 minutes. And that is not a comedy rule. That is coming from directly comparing this movie to the other two. They had their villains do something in the beginning. Rocco takes forever to do anything. They're just like, oh, let's go to prison to go undercover and find Rocco. And it's like, okay, why? He hasn't done anything yet. You haven't shown him doing anything. Show him doing something. I'm not saying I want to see a bomb go off, but at the same time, Naked Gun 2 had a bomb going off, and it was hilarious. You're able to manage that. You're able to do that in a comedy movie. You can do something funny with it. And they just did nothing with it. It really perturbed me for some reason. Here I was saying I wasn't going to get angry and I wasn't going to yell, but, you know, I care about these movies because they're good and they're entertaining, and especially because there was a new movie that came out in the Naked Gun series very recently, this year, as a matter of fact, and I enjoyed it. And that leads nicely into my closing. Thank you all for listening in to What to Watch Wednesdays tonight. I will be back at some point in the next couple of weeks telling you all what to watch. Good night, everybody.